Craig Lyon, who's out of the office right now, so please bear with me as I'm doing this. Roll call. Okay, Mr. Van Ho.
Present.
Mr. Stitchick.
Present.
Ms. Kilcoyne is excused. Mr. Lindemood.
Virtually present.
Thank you. Miss Acton.
Present.
Oh, sorry, Jamie. Miss McNulty.
Present.
Mr. Boland.
Present.
Okay. Mr. Rebuffo.
Sorry.
Mr. Rebuffo.
Mike's not.
Okay, we see Mr. Rebuffo on the meeting, so we'll wait until we hear from him. Mr. Colhase,
Here.
Ms. Heil, and then Ms. Carpenter is excused, so you do have quorum.
And just so everybody knows, this meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. We have a quorum. Aaron, will you please do the public involvement?
Yes, all AMATS committees are open to the public, and the public will be provided an opportunity to comment at each meeting. For each business item, we'll have a presentation by staff or the consultants, and then after that, the public will be given an opportunity to provide their comments. I did want to let everyone know we are on Teams meeting, so we have that open, so we could hear comments from people in person or on Teams. And the public was given an opportunity to provide any request to give a testimony today. So each business item will talk about whether we received anything.
Thank you.
And can we let the record show that Cindy Heil has joined virtually?
Oh, yes. Great.
Thank you. Do we have approval of the agenda? Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Do we have any changes? Are there any objections to adopting the agenda? The agenda is approved. You have the July 8, 2021 minutes for approval. Do we have a motion for adoption?
I move to.
Second. Do we have any changes? Are there any objections to adopt the minutes? July 8th, 2021 minutes are approved. Moving on to agenda item 5A, DPAC seat nomination. Aaron, you gonna present?
I'll do a quick introduction, and then Joni will be the one to do the legwork. So as everyone knows, we have a subcommittee, the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. They have a current seat open for the bicycle organization seat, and what's being brought for you today is a nomination to fill that seat. Joni?
Thank you. Yes, so Emily Weiser, and she's on the phone here. So if you have any questions for Emily, she'll be happy to answer those. But Emily Weiser is indeed replacing our our bicycle organization seat, which used to be filled by Steve Shell with Bike Anchorage. So I'll just read Emily's brief bio. Emily has been using a bike as her primary form of transportation for 14 years in 6 cities across the US and overseas. She has now settled in Anchorage and is keen to help improve the utility and accessibility of the municipality's bike network. In her free time, Emily enjoys birding by bike, road cycling, and building a patios, I don't know if I said that right, for her 2 otherwise indoor cats. So we are requesting that you review and approve Emily's bio and resume, which is attached here, so that she can become our new EPAC member for bike organization. And that you approve this to the policy committee so they can approve her. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Any questions or comments from the committee?
I move to recommend approval of Emily Weiser.
Open to the public.
public was invited to comment by notifying us of their desire to comment, but no such requests were received. Is that true?
Yeah, that is true. We
Right.
still do need to open it to the
Sure.
public.
What is the will of the committee? There is no public, sorry. Are there any comments by the public? Seeing none. What is the will of the committee?
I move to recommend Emily Weiser to the bicycle pedestrian advisory committee to the proposal.
Second, Cindy Heil.
Cindy. Are there any objections to approving the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Moving on to agenda item 5D, revisions to the AAC for President Pedestrian and Bike Safety. Aaron, are you going to present on this?
I'll give a quick brief and then give it over to Joni again. So what's being asked here is a letter of support for changes to the Alaska Administrative Code for bicycle and pedestrian safety. In our area here in AMATS, it's already been changed to cover this, but I believe there's a change going that will cover the fast planning, our sister deal up in Fairbanks. And so right before you is a letter that was written by BPAC. Joni, would you like to go through it?
Sure. Thank you, Aaron. So, so yes, just like Aaron said, this is a proposed revision to the Title 13 of the Alaska Administrative Code. It is through the Fairbanks Area Surface Transportation Planning Organization known as FAST Planning. I gave you a physical copy. Sorry, we didn't include these digitally for you, but this is the copy of the proposed changes to the code. So again, as Aaron mentioned, the things included in here are already a sort of a way of life down here in Anchorage area, but for FAST, this would be a helpful letter of support to help their area get covered in those areas, and then also to improve their bicycle and pedestrian safety. So I can go over just the brief changes that the code is asking for, and I will just go over those very briefly. But basically, it's asking for a 3-foot passing rule, which we already have here in Anchorage. And it's also asking for allowing a vehicle to move into a no passing lane when they're giving them authority to move into a no passing lane when they're passing a bicycle. So to give them extra room. It's also asking for safer movement for bicycles when they're in the need of being more left. Typically, bicyclists are asked to be as right as possible, but in some instances, they need to be further left if there's heavy snow conditions or if they're making a left turn and some other things like that. So those are highlighted in here. And I think the last thing is, oh, maybe that is the last thing. Jackson Fox is also on the phone if you would like to hear for him to go over the code provisions more in depth. He knows them a lot better than I do. But basically, our BPAC wanted to write a letter of support for him so that he could submit it with 3 other letters of support that FAST has gotten. They've gotten letter of support from CRW, our local engineering firm here in Anchorage, Alaska Outdoor Alliance, and the City of Homer have all written letters of support. So this will just be in addition to, and since we're the only other MPO in the state, it's going to be a nice letter for them to have. So, and our BPAC wrote a letter asking for that, and that's what's included in item 5B. And again, we're asking your approval to review and move it forward to the policy committee to approve. And if you have any questions for Jackson, he is on the phone as well.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the committee?
I guess I do have a question, Ken Polhays. And maybe you touched on it, Joni, I wasn't clear. Has the state reviewed the proposed language? The appropriate state agencies that would recommend this for approval in the Alaska Administrative Code, have they reviewed that and concurred with it?
That's a good question. So that's a question for Jackson, but I do know that the resolution was passed. I'm going to just read this off of the proposed code AAC revisions here, but The resolution was passed unanimously on March 17, 2021 by Fast Planning's Policy Board, which consisted of the Fairbanks North Star Borough, the City of Fairbanks Mayor, the City of North Pole Mayor, Alaska DOT and PF Northern Region Director, Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation Air Quality Division Director, and representatives from the FNSB Assembly and Fairbanks City Council. So, and if there's other agencies in there that aren't included, Jackson would, that you're asking about, Jackson would know. I'm sorry.
Hey, this is Jackson here. May I add some information to that question?
Yeah.
Okay, so the language that we have included in our proposed revisions to Alaska Administrative Code have been reviewed, and we received concurrence from the DOT regional offices as well as DOT headquarters. All the DOT traffic and safety engineers have looked at this language, offered their modifications, and so what you're seeing included in the packet there has been through DOT. The Department of Public Safety has not yet commented on these proposed changes. So it is our intent to submit these proposed changes and any supporting letters of support or resolutions from other communities throughout Alaska to the Department of Public Safety to initiate their review. And we do understand that if they consider these changes, they may make some modifications or revision to that language. So yes for DOT, not yet for Department of Public Safety.
Thank you. No further questions.
Sure. I just was wondering, it looks like I understand this to be a letter from the WPAC.
Yeah.
Is there any, would there be any reason that we also want to recommend that the policy committee also provide a letter of support, just to kind of really shore up that we are part of this?
Sure. Yeah, I think if this committee just thinks that's a good move, I think it would be great. I'm not sure, Jackson, if that sounds like that would be helpful to you as well. Would you like to have a letter from the policy committee supporting this?
Yes, I would. I mean, one of the reasons that we ran this through our policy board up here is that it was supported by all of our 3 local mayors that serve on that board in addition. So anyways, we serve 2 cities and a borough government, and all 3 of those mayors voted in favor of these revisions. So it would be beneficial to me to see the AMATS policy board weigh in on this as well, in addition to the Bike and Ped committee.
This is Matt Stichik. I have a question for Jackson. Jackson, those of us online don't have the supporting handout, unfortunately. Can you explain how shared use recommendations for shared use bike lanes and shared use markings would be incorporated into state law with these changes?
Yes, absolutely. So that's a good discussion point there, because there's mixed feelings about bike lanes and shared land use markings. What we've included in the proposed language is adding a provision to allow that as an option for communities to use on their roadways. Currently, the way that the Alaska Administrative Code is written and interpreted by DOT here locally in the northern region, it does not allow for bike lane or shared lane use markings on roadways. So, and I understand that Anchorage made a push for those, and possibly the shared lane use markings are being repealed, or you guys are not doing that anymore down there. But we do have some interest in our area on getting these lane markings on some low volume, low speed roadways where our local governments have expressed interest in trying them out in our area. So the provision simply allows the option for that. It does not direct any community to put those in. It just allows the option, because currently there is no option in administrative code to put those on state roadways.
What would prohibit a locality from applying a shared use marking?
Well, a locality, you mean like a city government putting it on
Yes.
a city street? Is that to clarify
Yep.
the question there. I don't believe there's any prohibitions of that in Alaska Administrative Code at this time. So it's interest from our community in getting bike lanes and shared lane use markings on some state roadways that, again, are low speed, low volumes of traffic.
I see. So this would apply to state-owned, maintained roadways.
Yes, they would allow the option. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for the committee?
We have one comment in the chat from James Starzak. He said he would suggest that any AMATS letter be through the PC as all other committees are advisory to them.
We're going through the PCs. We are going through the policy committee. So.
I guess I'd like, I don't know, Mr. Stars, I can actually speak to his comment. I'm wondering if he's meaning that we asked that the policy committee actually provide the letter, and this would support to that. I think that's what he's saying.
Yes, that's traditionally what we do is we get the policy committee to release everything.
Gotcha.
So if it's the committee's desire, we would probably draft a letter to the policy committee after recommendations from the BPAC and careful review. You know, we support it because BPAC supporting it means AMATS supports it. So we need to make sure that the policy is on board. So we could draft up something like that for the policy committee, and it would be something signed by our chair, our policy chair.
Yeah, this is James Starzak. That's exactly the intent of my comment.
Thank you, James. All right. Any other questions or comments from the committee?
This is Matt. I would just recommend that if you are redrafting the letter, you actually include the proposed markups to that section of administrative code as attachments to the letter, just to make sure that they are all presented concurrently.
That's a good idea. We'll make sure that's done. Thank you.
Matt? The public was invited to comment by notifying us of their desire to comment, but no such requests have been received. Are there any comments from the public? Tim? Would any members of the policy committee like to comment? What is the will of the committee?
I move that we recommend the policy committee consider this recommendation by BPAC and prepare a letter of support of the changes presented by FAST.
Second. Are there any objections to approving the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Karen, are there any other action items?
There are no other action items.
Yep. Moving on to project and plan updates. Are there any updates?
Yes, there will be a lengthy update. I hope everyone's ready. I will be.
Presentation, 15 minutes.
I will do my best, sir. Okay, everyone, I'm going to be giving a quick, yeah, I'll be having it on the screen there if you guys want to move around. So thank you very much. So I've timed this a few times. It has taken about 30 minutes without questions. So I will try my best to keep it moving forward, as I like to talk. Couple of things to start off with. I'm I love the work I do, so I come across as really in my presentation. So if you ask a question and respond and it sounds like I'm being rude, I'm not. I just am trying to make sure everyone has a good time while we're doing these presentations. So please don't be offended. So what we're going to go over today is the MTP 101. The MTP is the AMATS Long Range Transportation Plan. It covers 20 years, what we anticipate to do to help our system, our transportation system, keep it in a state of good repair, to help any deficiencies, et cetera. So the plan looks at the next 20 years. What projects do we want to construct or fund? What policies we'll want to do? and what goals and objectives and performance measures we want to hope to achieve in 20-year time frame. So the plan, oh, I almost forgot. So really quickly, I wanted to go over the format of the presentation today because it's a little different than what we've done in the past. Normally what we would do is we would get a PowerPoint presentation and slog through that. But Christine Schutte has helped me transition to ArcGIS story maps. So it's a little more of an interactive format. It's a lot more condensed and faster paced in its approach. So, and a lot more graphically pleasing, I hope. So one of the things you'll notice as we go through it, we have this bar right here. And each one is a different topic that we're going to, talk about. So it'll skip you down to it really quickly. The reason I bring that up is because we're going to be putting this presentation out on our website. There'll probably be a short video with me giving the presentation itself so people can watch it after the fact. The idea is to make this available to anyone who wants it to look at it or have me come and give the presentation, to give them a good, a quick 30-minute presentation on what is the MTP. We're going to be starting our MTP update, the 2050 MTP update here soon. And so we want to get people, the committees, the public, community councils, whoever, kind of having a good base understanding because there's a lot that goes into the MTP update. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So look forward to that. So, sorry, this is my second presentation today. The first one was 2 hours long, so I'm still kind of recovering from that. MTP process. This is a very quick and brief timeline that talks about the process. There's a lot that goes into it that's not explained here, committee approvals, public comments, that kind of stuff. But I just wanted to do a quick outline. You develop goals, objectives, and performance measures that lead into developing the criteria. You also do a status of the system, data analysis, your deficiency analysis to see where you're at. Then you do project selection by using the criteria you developed earlier. You have a physical constraint element. Then you get into policies and actions that may not be project specific, but more globally covering things. Then you have an air quality conformity determination. Then you have approval of the MTP, the MPO, and then FHW and FTA give final approval of the air quality determination. So it's a snapshot of what the process will look like. Yes.
I was just thinking about this. Is this page you're going to keep?
Yes. Thank you. So we're going to go through each of these right here, so you guys can. We'll talk about it a little bit more.
I think someone.
Did somebody have a comment?
You're welcome. Bye.
Well, thank you. I'll ask really quickly. We have different sections to go through. If you could please hold your comments until the end of that section if possible, because we have a lot to get through. I'll do a stop at a certain point. And ask questions.
So I gave you guys the name of a guest, Stacy Kane, who I thought was going to be there between 2 and 3. She actually just called me and said it may be closer to 3:30.
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Rebuffo, we muted you, so please don't be offended. Okay, first thing we want to talk about is the vision. Ooh, this is a good starting spot. Okay, this is where we get goals, which are what do we want to achieve, objectives, how do we want to achieve it, performance measures, how do we measure our success in achieving the goals and objectives, and then the target. How do we know if we succeed? Let's go into a little more detail on each one. Goals are typically more broad, overarching statements. A good example is one we have, it's improved travel conditions, where we talk about developing an efficient multimodal transportation system to reduce congestion and promote accessibility and improve system reliability. Woof, that's a lot of stuff that tries to cover. So, and that's a good example for you to understand that when we talk about the goals we want, they're really broad. And then we get into objectives where you try and put forward a more specific and measurable statement that could be a piece, a large piece of the goal or just a small piece. In this example, we're talking about improved system reliability for all modes. So we took that small little bit about improved system reliability and we said, this is the one objective we really want to focus on. A couple things to note about the goals and objectives. As an MPO, we are required to incorporate the national planning factors and performance measures, national planning factors, and national goals. Sorry. Overall, there's about 17 combined national goals and planning factors. There's a bunch of overlaps and stuff. So like safety is on both, One is the national goal, one is a planning factor. So we have kind of a baseline as an MPO of goals that we have to try and meet as part of our plan. So when people say, well, why is this in here? That's not what we want. Well, we have to meet it. So we try and identify which ones are the federally required ones. We can go above and beyond those, because say there's something that the feds don't have in their goals. So for example, climate change, greenhouse gas emission reduction, something like that. We could add something in there as a goal or objective to cover that. It just puts us on the hook for making sure that we're actually incorporating that into our process. So we need to be very strategic in our approach of what we add and incorporate into our long-range plan. We do look at the goals of the state and the municipality of Anchorage. If they have a long-range plan or if they have plans that they have goals and objectives too, we look at those to try and incorporate them where possible. But it may not cover everything because AMATS has a very specific and limited focus that it can do, and it may not cover everything that the state or the muni want to do. And so we do a pretty good job at trying to show how we're meeting our goals and objectives. I think the 2040 MTP did a really good job with one of our memos that we put out that showed how we're matching up with the federal ones, the muni ones, and keeping everything moving forward. The state ones were a little harder to do, so there was a little bit of an issue there. We'll correct it. 2050. Any questions on goals and objectives? Okay. Performance measures and targets. Oh boy, this is a crazy one. Performance and measures and targets have always been part of the planning process, but it's only through MAP 21 and the FAST Act that they've really received a bump up in importance of making sure that we are very specific in calling out our performance measures and targets. As such, those federal authorization bills actually set precedent on specific performance measures and targets, performance measures with their associated targets that we as AMATS, as an MPO, have to cover. We are an MPO of 200,000 or greater, so we're considered a TMA, Transportation Management Area. I hope I got that right. And so we have additional performance measures that we have to cover that other smaller MPOs do not. As a baseline, for the required ones, we have 40 performance measures and targets we have to cover as part of our planning process. So I try and emphasize the importance of, that's a lot of performance measures that we have to cover on a update cycle for our MTP, our TIP, everything. So when we look at these as part of the MPO, again, we have to make sure that we have enough staff and data to collect the data, use the data, and be able to show how we're incorporating it into our process. So it's just something to keep in mind as we move forward, that adding another 20 performance measures is probably going to be pretty difficult, because the 40 we have are pretty difficult for us. We in fact rely on the state for the majority of them. Granted, most of the performance measures cover state routes and they have most of the data, but we're still responsible for either supporting the state or setting our own. At this time, AMATS has decided to support the state in almost every objective or every performance measure, except for some of the 2 new ones that we have coming online this year, next year, something like that, about the non-single occupancy travel and the peak hour excessive delay. So we will discuss these as we move forward. I guess I'll go through the examples. A performance measure that relates to our improved travel condition is % of person miles traveled on the non-interstate NHS that are reliable. That is directly from federal regulations. So, and a target for that is 70% by 2021. So we're saying that 70% of person miles traveled on the non-interstate NHS are reliable. So it's a thing we gotta keep an eye out for. Some of these performance measures and targets do have to be updated yearly. Others are kind of a cycle. So if we add any new performance measures and targets, we'll have to think about what kind of update cycle do we want, impacts. For AMATS, we don't have as drastic of an impact if we don't meet our targets. We don't have funding changes that can happen like the state. The state has pretty strict requirements of what happens if they don't meet their targets. But we do have a certification review every 4 years by FHWA that can come in and let us know we've been bad and give us corrective actions and other things that could lead to decertification of the AMATS if we aren't careful with this. So there is a kind of invisible stick that's there if we're not good. So we need to be very strategic. Any questions on everything I've covered so far? I don't know if that means you guys understand or don't care.
I'll I'll throw one at you, Aaron. Has
Oh, okay.
has FHWA ever complained that the municipality uses objectives, statewide figures that apply only within our AMATS boundaries?
No,
Or
because
like safety objectives and,
no, our performance measures are relatively new, so we're still kind of catching up on reporting of them. And part of what's spelled out in federal regulations is that when we support the state in their targets, we're supporting whatever target they set. If they have a statewide one, that means we're supporting them in their statewide target. So they leave it up to us as the MPO to decide how we want to handle it. If we want to set our own target that is specific for our area, we have to go through a lengthy process of showing the data, where we got it, getting DOT to review it and say, yeah, that looks good. And then we can actually move forward with setting our own target. But that's a lot of intensive work that I don't know if we're ready for at this time.
thanks.
Yep. Any other questions? Yes, it's well done.
You're spinning off of that. So we'll be getting some data that's relevant. Like I know the climate action plan folks are doing some stuff that would be relevant to this. Is that hard to plug that in?
I mean, no, it depends on what kind of target we want to set. Climate action stuff is difficult because the climate action plan is pretty weak when it comes to actual actions that transportation can take to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It seems to put a lot of the effort and onus on us as AMATS to come up with all the solutions for everything. So it really would depend on what the data says and then what policy committee, staff, everything decides is kind of our next step forward. It's probably something we're going to be looking at for the 2050 MTP update, because we are working with Shana Kilcoyne's group on getting that information, because we reached out. We're using VMT as a way to help assess what is the greenhouse gas numbers, and we'll use that as a way to say, okay, here's our baseline, where we want to go from there. So it'll be part of our discussion.
Is she still on this AMATS board?
Yes, she's just not here today. Can you state your name as well?
John Little.
Thank you. Yes, no, Shana is not here today. Any other questions? Next one, criteria. Oh boy. Okay, criteria is pretty simple. I didn't want to spend too much time on it. It's a way that we use to assess projects that are nominated or brought forward for inclusion in the MTP. Does it meet our goals, objectives, performance measures, and targets? Is it helping AMATS move in the right direction that we want to see for our transportation system? Pretty simple. One thing, we like to make sure that our criteria is harmonized between our MTP and our TIP as best as possible. But please note that the MTP criteria is going to be more broad, less specific, because the MTP itself is more broad, less specific, because it is a 20-year plan that's looking regionally, whereas the TIP is a 4-year funding program very focused on those 4 years. We are going through an update of our TIP criteria right now, so it's perfect time when we do our MTP update. We'll be looking at those, whatever those criteria end up being, to make sure that we're matching up where possible the MTP criteria with the updated TIP criteria. Any questions? These are just some examples so you guys can see what I mean. So it's not a blank screen of, well, what is a criteria? It's this, help us. How many points should you assign to a project based on a particular idea? And these are developed as part of the development of the plan. So you'll be seeing the staff will bring them, there'll be public comment, all that kind of stuff. Any questions? And I did forget to say, I even have it in my notes and I didn't do it. The goals and objectives section, this will have a public comment period as well. So we'll be putting out the goals, objectives, performance measures, and targets for a public comment period. I'm not sure how long at this point, but it is an opportunity for the public to comment. So we want to make sure they understand. Next, data analysis. Oh, so this one is the kind of fun part. So this is where we are looking at our transportation system as it is at the point we look at it. Now, that sounds really stupid. It's today. Where are we at today with our modes? How many people are biking? How many are walking? How many are transit, et cetera? Because what we need to do is we need to set a baseline for how our transportation system is doing. Like performance measures needs a baseline to start from, and then you know where you can go and stuff like that. That's what the status of the system is. So the graphic you see before you is an example from our wonderful 2040 MTP that I love the coloring and everything because it's really easy to see. You can see the different modes on here, what our current status or what our current system look like in terms of miles of existing system by mode. As you can see, it's predominantly road. So just figured I'd point that out. Okay, so what we do from there is we move on to the deficiencies analysis. So we take the status of the system and then we project that out to the end of our performance period, so 20 years. What does our transportation system look like?
Can you go back a slide?
Oh, yeah.
With the existing system and the 166 miles, you're showing a pathway. Does that include Chester Creek and Coastal Trail? Since they're off-road?
I think so, yes. I'll have to check on verify on that to make sure that we're
Figure the
incorporating
numbers
it in.
low.
I'll have to ask him. See.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. That's a
Too
good
bad
question.
it's a DOT.
Thank you for stating your name. So what we do is we take the system deficiency or system status of the system. We project it out 20 years to the end of our performance period and say, what does the transportation system look like if we didn't make any changes to the system at all throughout that 20-year period? Because what you're trying to do is identify locations where there's some concern that can be developing now or later and say, okay, maybe we should start putting projects in those locations. Say, here's a way to help identify the needs for our system. So this map right here is a level of service example from the 2040 MTP. I will let you know we are looking at trying to use something other than level of service for the 2050 MTP, but we'll see what happens. And this shows you that there are some areas of concern based on level of service, Tudor, Glen Highway, Muldoon. So we use this as a way to help develop, okay, maybe we should put some projects in there, or if we put a project somewhere, will that help this area? Because it doesn't necessarily mean we have to do a project right on Tudor, but if we do a project on an adjacent road and it helps Tudor, we should be able to see that as part of our modeling update. So this is what we do in addition to project nominations and everything of how we get projects for the MTP. So it's a pretty data intensive thing, and it is one of the requirements we have to do since we've been doing this for the beginning of time. Yes.
Hi, Erin, it's Josie from HDR, and I was curious, you mentioned you're going to use a different diagnostic or term other than level of service. Do you have an idea of what you're going to use? And if not, when we would hear what that might be?
Well, I can't say for sure until we start the update, so I don't know when it's going to be. Our thought was maybe VMT as a way to help. We could also use vehicle hours of delay, which is pretty similar to level of service. It's just a different way of looking at it. A level of service is delay. It's more impacted by smaller basic things at intersections. So we got to be really careful how we use it. And people from the public have come out and said, we don't want to see level of service. Everyone's moving away from level of service. So we're trying to see what better options or other options, sorry, not better options, what other options there are out there. And that'll be part of our discussion for the MTP update. So I don't know yet. So
Thanks. You answered my question.
thank you. Okay, any other questions about these? Next, we have projects. Where do we get projects? Nominations, the CIP, the AMATS TIP, the STIP, DOT's 10-year plan, any new plans, any plans out there that have been updated or new since the last MTP update. We're pretty strict on that. Some people are like, why don't you include draft plans? For the most part, we don't like including draft plans because they're subject to change, especially when the political side of things get involved. They can be a pretty radical change. And if we've started doing our modeling with those projects in there, it's very expensive and timely for us to go back and redo it. So we like to be really specific. It needs to be an approved plan that's been updated or is brand new since the last MTP update. So in this case, since the 2040 was updated a year ago. Any questions about where we get projects from? It's pretty self-explanatory. We'll be getting projects, we'll be scoring them, bringing them to the committees. They'll be looking at them and helping develop a list of what we want to put into the MTP. Tied with that is fiscal analysis. This is my favorite part of the MTP. I love this portion because what I get to do is I get to look at historical data for funding and try and develop a funding plan for the MTP because we're required to show that we have enough funding available over the 20 years to pay for the project that we want to put into it. It's an EPA requirement in order to have an air quality conformity determination, and we have to have an air quality conformity determination in order to have an approved MTP. So it's kind of this interlocking mechanism that exists out there. So we have different options of funding, of where they come from, but the reality is it's two major sources, federal and non-federal. Federal would be AMATS's allocation that we get every year. DOT has an allocation that they get. Then there's non-federal, which is state GF dollars, MPO, the municipality of Anchorage money. And, we count things that, the railroad gets money for their transit side of things. We account for the public transportation department, and we have a whole list of options available. A couple of things to remember is we have to be really careful about this and not over assume, because we want to be realistic in our assumptions, because we're setting up expectations about what's going to be happening over the 20 years. So if you go hog wild and say, we're going to get $100 million from state geo funding for the life of the plan, that's not really realistic because the historical data doesn't support that. And you just got to kind of like, does that make sense while we're going through it? We do have other sources, grants, other things like that. If there's a source of funding that is expected to be reasonably available, we can incorporate it into our plan. So what that means is if the muni or the state have tried to take action on something, either through the legislature or the assembly, and said, we're looking at adding a transportation fund that can go towards projects, and they're talking about it in the assembly, and they've put some kind of resolution together, we can incorporate that in because there's been action that they're trying to take on. A good example is a few years ago, the state tried to put together Alaska Transportation Fund, and they actually had members of the legislature working on it. And so we came up with a plan of what that looked like and how much money that was getting to us. And then when we did the 2040 update, we looked into it and that had kind of died. And so we had to take it out of our plan. So when we do our fiscal analysis this time through, we'll see if there's anything else like that that's come up. Mr. Weddleton, I think you had.
Yeah, I just curious, so that new federal infrastructure plan coming, that'll be 5 years or more, so overlapping this, how would that?
As soon as they finish finalizing it, we'll let you know.
Yeah.
It'll
It'll be similar to, years ago, they did a recovery act, a similar one that's like a stimulus plan. So it'll probably be pretty similar to that, I believe. We do have to wait and see what happens. So I unfortunately don't have a lot of information because I don't know I don't know how much the state's gonna get. I don't know how much we're gonna get. I don't really know the plan, but I think Todd might have some more.
Yeah, right now it's anticipated in what we're seeing and what we're reviewing and what we're preparing for is about a 30 to 40% increase in our formula funds alone. Interestingly enough, a large portion, as the way the bill is written right now, a large portion of those funds are going to be coming to us in grants, competitive grants. And so that's an opportunity because that's something that we haven't been very successful at. So it's something to look at.
I have a question along those lines. This is Matt, and I'm wondering if funds with the Infrastructure Investment Act that come from non-traditional transportation departments, like say Department of Energy for electrical vehicle charging infrastructure, would that necessarily go through AMATS?
No.
Okay.
And we would account for it where possible, but the likelihood is it's so difficult to do. We'd have to take a look at it on a case by case basis. So I don't know if I could answer today what we would do for that. When we do look at funding that's available, we look at kind of how the state's handled it, where it's gone to, how much of it's gone to AMATS. Is it something we can reasonably assume will happen again? Was it a one-time thing, or is it going to be an every year thing? I will say this go round, we're going to have to be a lot more strict about the state general funds. The 2040 MTP was pretty generous in terms of its assumptions, but as we've seen continued no funding from the state, it's going to be really hard to say that we will get some funding in short term. So we'll have many discussions over this. I'm very excited for this. I'm going to get started here soon working on it. So any other questions on the funding or project side of things? And so just, this is another public comment period. So there'll be plenty of opportunity for people to be like, why are we doing this? We'll have work sessions on the funding assumptions and everything. So this won't be the last you hear of it. Okay. Next we have policies and actions. So this is a section of the MTP that is covering things that are hard to put into a direct project. So for example, we have a policy about having an interconnected network of streets. How do you put that into a specific project? It's really hard. So we have a section that's for policy and action items for things to help us move forward to achieve our goals and objectives that are not project specific. It's a whole section in the plan that we're going to put together. We have another one in there that's talk about look at AMATS funding allocation, the percentages we apply to different modes, and assess if we want to make any changes to it. So right now we have a certain amount going to roadway, non-motorized, CMAC. Do we want to shift those numbers around? So it's that kind of stuff. Traditionally, this is stuff that we have not been able to model in our transportation model because it is a regional model, but we're trying to get a policy, strategic planning model in place that we can actually put these policies and action items in that can help us model them and show what benefit we get to the transportation system. So it could include things like parking changes, you know, a VMT tax, for example, or other stuff like that. Any questions on the actions policies? This will be another comment period, so we'll look forward to that. Air quality. So I'm not an air quality expert, and I hope not to say anything stupid or wrong, but I'm assuming Ms. Heil or Mr. Stitchick can correct me. Air quality is one of those things that we are required to have, an air quality conformity determination, sorry. And here, let me read the text so I don't mess it up. So basically, this shows that for the selected criteria, CO, which is motor vehicle emissions generally, PM 2.5 wood smoke, and PM 10 dust. These are basic examples. They are not covering everything possible that falls under them, but these are the ones we traditionally talk about. We have to make sure that these are not directly inhibiting implementation of our SIP measures. The SIP is the statewide implementation program. It is another requirement that we have, and it's basically a way to help control air quality within our state. In there, we have 3 measures, transit marketing, transit rideshare, and air quality education business awareness campaign. So we as AMATS put money towards those SIP measures to help make sure that we continue to meet our air quality requirements. This is a lengthy process. We want to make sure that our projects are not going to inhibit us in any way. So there's a lot of work that we have to do. Traditionally, what we do is we do this air quality assessment after we've done our project selection. If you go back and add more projects after the fact or take away projects, you have to be really careful with that. So we try and wait until the very last minute to get our air quality stuff done before we move on to any approvals, just to make sure we have the latest and greatest available information for everyone. And again, this is what FHWA approves. And by approving the air quality, they're basically saying everything else that is covered by this air quality is approved. Projects, fiscal assumptions, policies, goals, objectives, etc. And as we are a maintenance area, this has to be updated every 4 years. An attainment area is every 5 years. So we have a little bit of a stricter update cycle. So anyone keeping track, we had our 2040 MTP approved August 21st of 2020. So our next update has to be approved August 21st of 2024. It is almost August 21st of 2021. So we have 3 years to get our plan updated. So it can be moving pretty quick. Any comments about air quality? Okay, no one screamed at me, so no big problem.
Aaron, just that PM 2.5 doesn't apply to the AMATS boundaries. That applies to Fairbanks.
Thank you.
And he did good.
Thank you. The basics, I got them. And just so you know, there will be a public comment period for this air quality determination. It's an opportunity to put it out for the public to have them review it and give us their feedback and stuff. So, okay, next is the approval process. Okay, so this timeline that you see in front of you is once we've done the project review, once we've done our modeling, once we've done our fiscal assumptions, once everything is put together, we have an internal agency review for DOT and the Muni to take a look at it and make sure everything kind of looks okay and then we haven't messed up anywhere major. While we're doing that, we also have a resource agency review. This is a requirement of ours, but it's also a good planning practice. Resource agencies are like the Corps of Engineers, Historic Preservation, DNR, that kind of stuff. because there are a lot of resources that we have, wetlands, parks, everything like that, that we need to make sure that we're keeping everyone informed of what's happening over the next 20 years with this plan. Once we get those comments from those agencies, we bring them back and incorporate any changes. We bring it to the TAC and Policy Committee and we ask for a public review period. So this will be the chance for the public to weigh in on the plan, the overall plan itself. They've had a chance to weigh on every piece of the plan up to this date, but this is them seeing the entire plan at once. We also have an assembly public hearing period as required by our operating agreement and municipal code. So we give the assembly a chance to look at it, provide their comments, and ask for X number of changes if they want. Once all of that is done, that is a pretty lengthy process. So, these seem short, but they are not, I guarantee you. Once all that's done and we've addressed any of the comments, we bring them forward to the Technical Advisory Committee for review and recommendations to the Policy Committee. Then the Policy Committee does their final review and approval. Once that's done, the MPO is pretty much done, and we move on to FHWA approval of the air quality conformity determination. So step 7 does have a big, lengthy public comment period. Step 8 won't have a public comment period because that goes to FHWA. They're doing their thing for however long it takes. So this is about 3 years worth of work that we have ahead of us. And I say us because we're all going to be involved in it. Are there any questions overall? Comments, concerns, complaints? I think I did it. I don't actually know how long I've been speaking, but it's not 3:30, so we're good. Oh, yes, Mr. Weddleton.
Just one thing, thinking that this will be posted online for people, which is tremendous, because I could send people to this instead of trying to explain it poorly. A little bit of a sense of that timeline. Because you look at this, you go, is that 6 months or is that 20 years? You can't tell from this right there at that screen.
It's the reason I haven't put anything is because I don't know at this point, because if I want to put the minimums, it's a 30-day minimum public comment period. But the policy committee could, for the public review draft, it's a 30-day minimum for that. Is that what the policy committee is going to do? I don't know. I hope that we can have at least a year for review and approval, but with how slow things have been going to get the consultant on board, it's kind of eating into our time. So I can at least put the minimums if you want to give that sense, but I don't know if that would really give people a good sense of how long it takes to do the entire process, or how much we would actually want it to go.
Even a comment, this can take up to 3 years. Because you can look at a similar kind of thing like this and think, oh, so December, I guess.
Okay.
Right? I mean, just, people who are haven't done this before, they have no.
Okay. We can put something on there about, historically, it's taken X amount of time for us to go from the internal agency review to final policy committee approval, for the X number of MTP. We can put like 2035 and 2040 and say historically, but maybe put a note on there that, the next update is, to be determined of how long it'll take, but, get an idea. So I can look at something and see.
What drives the schedule is that conformity deadline for the air quality conformity. So
Yes.
We've got 3 years left.
So I do want to point out something really quickly. Thank you, Matt. I have a big deadline looming in front of me that scares me to no end. Our 2040 MTP was late. We used up our 1-year grace period, which we are allowed, but FHWA asked that we not do that again for the 2050 and actually gave us a corrective action in our certification review to not do that again and to make sure we update the MTPs on time. So I want to make sure that we have approval by FHWA of this MTP, this upcoming update, by the deadline. So we may have some shortened periods of public comment or review of documents by the committees. And if people want to be mad, that's fine, but I want to stick to that deadline as much as possible. So I would appreciate your guys' help when we ask for a review of things or getting people involved and getting comments responded to and stuff. And I will constantly be reminding everyone about that deadline as we get closer. I may have a ticking clock with me every meeting I go, so people see how much time is left.
Could that maybe just be the solution of saying deadline no later than? So it's very clear that
Yeah.
it will be done at this date.
So one of the things I wanted to do with this MTP 101 is try and keep a lot of those specifics to that one MTP out of it, because I wanted to say that I want this to be like a longer term through multiple MTPs. I can work with Christine and see if there's something we can come up with that can maybe add to this. It says for the next MTP update, once we have a better idea of what that looks like, we can give a, here's our estimated timeline or something like that. So we can maybe have that available and provide it to people. So, any other questions? Okay, one last thing, and then I'll move on. I did want to announce today, we actually have official approval of the consultant for the 2050 update. We're going with R&M Consultants. So we're very excited to get them on board and get started. I have my first kickoff meeting tomorrow, and then it'll be a race to the finish. So expect to see me more often with presentations or action items or other things here very quickly. Okay.
Aaron,
Yes.
I just have a quick question. This is Cindy Heil. A lot of things that impact the length of time it takes to do an MTP is how much time you spend to do a full model update, or whether you go through a full goals update. We've taken in the past, we did what we called an interim update, which said, okay, we're going to do an update in this time period, and we're only going to do, some of these steps within it. And then on the every other year, we could do, a full goals, redo the whole goals, put them all out for public comment, do, the whole 9 yards, versus an interim one, which would say, okay, we just did the goals. They're really good. We're going to let those sit for 2 cycles, 8 years, before we go through that whole thing again, because it does take so much time. So things to think about, so a couple of things that we did was, we decided what the boundaries of the MTP development was, and then the technical advisory committee recommended to the policy committee what those boundaries would be, and they passed a resolution that said, okay, we're going to develop the MTP acknowledging the time frame that it has to be done, and these are the things we're going to keep in place, and these are the things we're going to update, and this is how we're going to set about developing the MTP, some of the details. So that might be something we want to do again, given that we've already lost a year. And that when you start thinking about, and if FHWA has said you have to have it in by X date, they have to approve it by the end of the year. You have to give them time to approve it. You can't give it to them on the last day, right? That means you back that up a little bit to get it processed through headquarter DOT and all that stuff. So you start backing things up, and we really don't have 3 years to get this done. We have less than that. And so those are the kind of timeframes that probably should be added into this, that maybe not on the website, but if you have that timeline, when it goes along with where you're saying, you have your time clock, you say, here's our schedule. These are the things we have to do. And if we can't build all that stuff into something, then we have to look at what needs to be minimized or reduced.
Yeah, that's my plan for when we start the 2050, is kind of giving everyone a good overall timeline, all the tasks we have to do and how long it's anticipated to take. And let them know that even a month delay can be a 4 to 5 month delay for the rest of the project. So that means we may cut out an entire public comment period, an extra public comment period, or may reduce something. I will kind of backtrack on a thing. The interim 2035 MTP was really nice because all we had to do was say, okay, the modeling really hasn't changed. We're confirming that. We're confirming the fiscal analysis. It was a beautiful thing to do because it bought us a little bit of extra time. Unfortunately, we can't do that with this MTP update because our modeling year is expiring. Sorry, it's a technical thing, but depending on when you set your outer year for the model is when you have to update it again. And our model year basically expires in the middle of this MTP update. Because when we did the 2040, we didn't really go out far enough. We took it to the bare minimum. And so that left us hamstrung and we can't do an interim update for it. So we have to do a full model update at this point. Well, not a full model update, but like we have to do an actual model update with this one. With this one, I tried to extend the year out a little, 10 years or so to buy us that extra time. So maybe the next MTP update can be an interim update that only takes a year or so and is a lot easier for us and buys us a little more time. But I thank you for raising that point, but that's so everyone is aware, goals and objectives and other things like that, we're probably going to have a reduced time frame of reviewing them. They've just been updated. We'll update them where possible, but we don't have a whole lot of time to spend a year and a half or more on goals and objectives for a round table of people to tell us everything we've been doing wrong. So it's just a heads up for you guys in the public to hear. And I'm sure somebody will be mad at me for saying that, so I know. Okay, any other questions or comments?
Just a quick comment. Ken Cole has a nice job there. Good, clear, concise presentation.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll find more things to add or update if we go out. I will say for anyone listening, if you want a presentation for your group or community council or something, I need you to send a request to me or Craig asking to come give the presentation. I am not able to read people's minds to know when they want me to come. And I don't really have the time to sit there and go, I'm going to go to every single community council in a month to give the presentation. There's a lot of work to be done, but if somebody asks, I will be there in a heartbeat to give the presentation itself. So just letting you guys know. Okay, that's all I had.
Aaron, I have a follow-up question to Cindy's discussion. So it sounds like you can have an interim MTP for any number of reasons beyond just fresh update of the base year for the transportation model. Is there is there any possibility that this would still be considered an interim MTP because we're not updating necessarily all the goals this go around?
I mean, it could be considered that, but I mean, yeah, we could call that if that makes people comfortable, but I'm not so I don't really care. If we want to call it an interim MTP update and make it seem like that, then that's fine. But to me, it's an MTP update and I'm just going to move forward to get it done on time. So if you guys want me to call it the interim MTP update, I can go ahead and do that.
I'm just trying to set expectations for what all we're going to address this go around.
Yeah, and that'll be part of my presentation or initial kickoff with the committees is kind of talk about what our expectations are for each of the individual pieces that make up the MTP. Talk about goals and objectives and all that kind of stuff. So
if I can make a suggestion, it's maybe compromise, and I don't know that I even like when you call it interim, but and Title 21, we have like comp plans we call them targeted updates. Okay. Just to make it more clear that, hey, we're not reopening the whole book here, we're just in this plan, but kind of targeting the areas that we think need updated, so that may be another term.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, and I'm sorry, I didn't want to say I didn't care. Please don't be offended, Matt. I did not mean that in any way, shape, or form. I do care, but to me, the name is less important than just getting the idea out there that we're going to be limited, targeted in our approach to what we're updating for this MTP.
Got it.
So thank you. Targeted, limited.
Okay. Moving on to general information updates. Are there any updates?
Yes, there is. As you can see it up on the screen or on your iPads. I'm actually going to open mine online. We do have the third quarter obligation report. So the third quarter obligation report is part of our process where we have to show how we're doing in terms of getting our funding obligated for the TIP. The third quarter, we're required to be plus or minus 5%. Currently, we are at negative 0.42%. So we are right on track with getting our funding obligated by the end of the fiscal year, which is August, September, next month. Oh, dog, that's a lot closer than I thought. So, yeah, DOT's been really good at helping us keep on track with all of this. We've done really good at getting large projects moving forward, such as the O'Malley Road reconstruction. It's nice to have that one kind of moving forward and off the books for us. And I don't know if you guys have any questions or not.
Look through it real quickly. Looks like the change is good. Okay. No questions. Hearing no questions, we'll move on. Floor is open for comments from the committees. The committee members have any comments they wish to make at this time?
Yeah, I guess I don't know if it's appropriate, but I'd like to congratulate Brett Coy being the new municipal traffic engineer and welcome aboard until next month, but.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I'm excited. Yes, I have been telling people.
I as well. Are there any other comments from the committee? Need those online have any comments in which to add at this time? All right. Time is 3:38. Meeting is adjourned.